What is going on, guys? This is BunnyMuffins. I have the meta snapshot for patch 12.6, and we have a lot of mix-ups. If you guys didn't check the patch rundown before, we have the link over here. I'll leave a card on the top right. But essentially, there's a large attack damage change and a lot of buffs and nerfs to a lot of different comps because we had a really long patch before, but we are going to get settled in right now. We also have a new comp of the week, and I'm also going to highlight some comps that I feel like are the best for climbing. If you're below masters. So starting out at the top, and of course we're going to go over how to play every single one of these comps after the summary, but in the S tier right now there are two clear winners. It is Arcanists and Hextech, and keep in mind there are multiple versions of these comps which are also in the A tier. That's literally how strong these are right now. In the A tier we have Warwick Reroll in the Chemtech Challengers, Twinshot Arcanist, which is our comp of the week. It is a very popular comp coming out of China. And then after that we have Strikers, which is a clone of the Hextech build, Renata Bruisers, Debonair Draven. This one is a little weird because you can go all over the place. Talon Assassins, which is my pick for climbing below masters, and then Snipers. Similar to Debonair Draven, these two comps are pretty tricky to play, so I would avoid these two if you are not experienced on those two comps. Onto the B tier, we have Socialite Irelia. No kidding, like this comp got nerfed so much, so it is going from S to B tier. Innovator, same story. They nerfed the augments for Innovator a lot, which hurt them a ton. Syndicate Ahri, it's decent, but I'd rather play the Arcanist version. Twitch Reroll is okay if you get good starts for it. Same with Ashe Reroll. Mutant Malzahar, this got a lot of changes as well, especially to Synaptic Malzahar. So it hasn't really found its footing yet. Some people still are playing Malzahar, but a lot of your Malzahars are getting taken by the Arcanist right now, so it's a little trickier to play in general. Now onto the C tier. The only time I would play Reroll Corki is with Thieving Rascals or any of the other super strong Yordle augments and getting them right at the start. If not, I wouldn't play that. And then Reroll Brand, kind of same story. Unless you get very specific augments, I would kind of avoid playing all the C tiers right now. Now on to how to play each and every comp. We're going to start out at the top with Arcanists. There's like a standard version and then there's a reroll version. So right now the reroll version is a little stronger. So that is going to be focusing around Malzahar and Vex carry. And if you don't get those, or if you're being contested, you could go ahead and go into the later parts of the game, do an Ahri carry. Malzahar and Ahri use very similar items in the blue buff, and any AP item will do just fine on them. And then in the late game, you could also switch into a Victor. You may notice at the top here, this one's 4 Arcanists, but you could run 4, 6 Arcanists. You could run all sorts of different combinations. You don't really have to play this exact specific build, because it always depends on what legendaries you're hitting that game and all that good stuff there. But essentially, if you want to play the best version right now, I recommend doing the reroll version. You reroll at level 7 for Malzahar and Vex 3, and then you also pick up Morgana 3 if it's available if you want to run the Syndicates. If not, do standard leveling, play for Ahri and Victor as we talked about before. Oh, and one quick note, Malzahar did get mana changes. I still prefer blue buff over the Spear of Shojin. The main reason is because you could flex that item between both Ahri and Malzahar, and the comparison between these two items are very similar. So for blue buff, your first cast comes out right away, and then for every other cast, it takes 6 auto attacks for your second cast. For Spear of Shojin, you need to do 1 auto attack before your first cast, and then 5 after that for every other attack. So in the long run, Shojin probably is slightly better, but again, I prefer the blue buff because you can flex between the itemization on different characters. Now onto the next build, we have Hextech Sivir. Sivir's been getting a lot of attention lately. She was super popular during the World Championship qualifiers, which happened last week. I believe some of them are still going on. I think the Oceanic server right now is being played, and she is probably one of the best comps both for last patch and for right now. The main thing you need, I'd say, is a Rage Blade, and the great thing about this comp is that you could flex between 2, 4, and 6 Hextech along with 2, 4, and 6 Strikers. So depending on what units you get, you can play pretty much whatever and always have a strong comp. So that's why this comp is in the S tier right now. It is both strong and flexible, which is exactly what you need in a game like TFT. So for the items on Sivir, Static Shiv and Quicksilver are the best for the Hextech version, but if you want to flex between the Striker and Hextech Sivir version, I'd recommend prioritizing Guinsoo's Rage Blade because this is good in both versions. After that, stuff like Bloodthirster, Giant Slayer, and any other attack damage or attack speed item like Last Whisper also works really well on Sivir. Keep another note, in this build we have Silco in, but if you don't get Silco, you could put in all sorts of other replacements, such as Vi, which we also have listed here. Keep in mind there are 8 units out here, but we have Alistair as a Colossus, so you won't be able to run one of these units in most cases if you're only at level 8. Now moving on into the A tier, we have Warwick Reroll. Warwick Reroll is probably one of the better comps right now. I like it a lot because it's just very straightforward to play. If you get a lot of Warwicks early, you could go ahead and just force it, and he's going to be the main carry in both of these comps. So we have two versions up here right now. We have the Bruiser Chemtech version, and this one only runs 2 Challenger. Luckily, they share the same item with the 6 Challenger version. I think the 6 Challenger version right now is slightly stronger. It's really tough to say, though. It depends on just what units you're hitting. So how do you decide between the two? Let's say you hit some of the key Chemtech units, such as Renata, then you could go ahead and play Warwick Reroll. Also, if you have like a Morellonomicon, like it makes much more sense to go for the Renata builds if you get a lot of rods. Because in the other version, in the Challenger version, getting a lot of rods doesn't really help you too much, so you kind of don't really need to use it there. You could put the rod items on Kai'Sa, but you typically don't get Kai'Sa till much later in the game, so it's much harder to play in the mid game if you get a lot of rods. So that's one way you could decide between going either of these two comps. For playing the comp, you want to reroll at level 6 for Warwick. Rerolling essentially just means rolling down to 50 gold every single turn, and then after that you get Warwick 3-star. You need 9 copies of Warwick to do that. Go ahead and level up to level 7 and reroll for Tryndamere 3, or power level to level 9 if you don't have a lot of Tryndameres. Keep in mind, I list out core units and great augments for all of these compositions. So if you guys want to check that out, head on over to my website at bunnymuffins.lol/meta. So now onto Twinshot Arcanist. This is the comp of the week. It's a comp from China, as far as I know, and I'm not really too sure why it works. I just know that it works. A lot of people are playing it, at least in the high levels, so I do recommend playing this as soon as you can because it is going to become popular really, really soon. So one interesting thing to note is that you can use a lot of different items on your primary carry, which is Lucian. So right now, on the picture here, we have the blue buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, and Hextech Gunblade. But you could use all sorts of different stuff. You could use like Hat, you could use Static Shiv, you could use Giant Slayer, you could use Morello. There are really tons of different options you could use on Lucian. Don't pigeonhole yourself into very specific builds because he could really use anything. Another thing to note, you may have noticed we have 6 Arcanists here. You could drop down to 4 Arcanists and run 3 or 4 Twin Shots instead, because that is going to be a really strong version as well. Your main tank is going to be Vex, and if you guys haven't noticed yet, we have a lot of 3-cost unit in this build. So what you want to do is reroll at level 7 for Vex, Lucian, and Malzahar. Malzahar being more optional. And the beautiful thing about this build is that you could flex between the regular Arcanist build and the Twin Shot build. Because look, we pretty much are running the same exact units as the S tier comp up here. So you can easily flex between both of the comps, which is what the great thing about this is. You always like having a strong comp and also having multiple options. Now onto the next build, we are going to go over Strikers. So Strikers, you want to focus on Sivir as a main carry. Irelia got nerfed a little bit too much. I talked about this in the patch notes, and like, yeah, if you nerf a champion in a lot of different ways, turns out they're not going to be as good in the next patch. So yeah, if you do the Striker version, you want to focus more on Sivir. She likes focusing more on attack damage and attack speed items. Not so much the on-hit stuff as she does in the Hextech build. So if you're going for Sivir, you hit an early Sivir 2, let's say, or you just have a Sivir 1, and you're deciding to go between Hextech or Striker build, you want to take a look at your items. So if you have a lot of the attack speed items, maybe you want to go more towards a Hextech build. If you have like Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, Last Whisper, or something like that, maybe you want to go more for the Striker build because Sivir is going to benefit more from that there. And this one is just going to be standard leveling. I did update the leveling guide on my website. If you guys want to check that out, I might make a video on it later. I'm not really too sure yet. Renata Bruiser is going to be the next comp here. This build has just been a staple in every single patch so far. I mean, it's very simple to play. You just run 6 Bruisers, run a Renata. You could also run 4 Bruisers. There are a couple of different versions of this build, but it really just depends on what you're hitting during that game. You really just want to focus on Renata. Blue buff, Morello, Hextech Gunblade are the 3 core items on her. It's pretty static. You don't really need anything else in this build. And then you just buy time for Renata to kind of bulldoze through everyone slowly but surely. Next up, we have Debonair Draven. So this build is a little tricky. It's only being really played well by very high tier players and not so much everywhere else. So if you look at the data, like Debonair Draven's doing awfully. But if you look at the top players, they're playing Draven all the time. So there's a bit of a dichotomy right now. So I really only recommend playing this build if you really know what you're doing or if you are just in love with Draven. The main reason behind that is because you don't go for a set specific build whenever you're going for Draven. I have the 5 Debonair version listed out here because this is the easiest one to follow, but most of the comps you see with Draven, they run all sorts of different stuff. You might see 3 Debonair and then just like a bunch of random legendaries. You typically just really go for Draven and then go into a level 9 build and then just play whatever you're hitting and whatever you're 2-starring. That's going to be the best comp for Draven, so that's why when you look into the data, Draven's not going to be listed as like one of the main comps because he doesn't really have a set comp, so all these like algorithms or whatever that are trying to like pick up all these comps in the data, they just can't pick up any actual Draven comps. But if you look manually at the best players, they are playing a lot of Draven right now. Same exact story is happening for Jihn. Like Jihn is being played in 2 sniper, 4 sniper. I've even seen some 6 sniper games by some of the like very best players in the world. And there are a lot of flexible builds you could do. Like 4 clockwork is another thing. That's a really popular thing people are doing right now too. And pretty much with these 2 builds, you just have to flex around your units and just play TFT in order to build the best comps. There's no like set 8 units that you're going for every time, contrary to some of the other comps that I list out in this meta snapshot. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing both these comps. You're generally just playing standard and just trying to have good fundamentals in order to win the game. Next up, we have Talon RR. This is the best comp below Masters, I'd say, because it just punishes so many teams. Because if you don't know how to position, you'll get steamrolled by this comp every single time. So the most important thing, obviously, is just getting a lot of talents. So just because it's easy to play doesn't mean you should go for it that often, even if I'm saying it's like the best comp to climb with, because it is a reroll comp at the end of the day. You can only go for a reroll comp if you have the right starts for it. So I'd say if you don't have like at least a Talon 2 somewhere during stage 3, like don't even try going for this comp. Ideally, you'd have like 4 or 5 copies of Talon by the time you reach like stage 3, 5, but that doesn't always happen. So always keep other options in mind. Don't just slam the rapid fire cannon and just force Draven from the start unless you get like very good augments for this build. And I list out some of those augments down here. So onto the B tier, we have Socialite carry. So before the primary carry is Irelia, people haven't really figured out what the best carry is right now for Socialite. But one thing that caught my eye, and I talked about this in the patch notes, I did suspect that fights would last a little longer because they nerfed all the AD on a lot of champions. And because of that, Kai'Sa might be coming back in. Kai'Sa was great because she loved long fights, and that was what set 6 was all about. Set 6.5 was much faster in terms of the actual battles, so she kind of fell out of the meta, but I feel like she's starting to climb back in. So we might see next week, Kai'Sa might be the best Socialite carry again, and we'll be slamming stuff like Morellonomicon, Rageblade, Archangel Staff on Kai'Sa, and be having a lot of fun with that. And also they changed Socialite so that you could go up to 5. Maybe there's like a 5 Socialite build with Kai'Sa that we don't know about yet. That is pretty good. Of course, with this build, again, it's similar to the Jihn and the Draven builds that we've been talking about. These types of comps where the units are super flexible, you kind of only want to play this comp if you really know what you're doing. That's why I list a lot of these difficulties as high, because I don't recommend just playing for them, because I don't want to directly recommend straight up playing whatever you see on your screen here, because the builds vary greatly based on your augments, based on the units you're hitting, and based on the items you're getting. So sometimes you get great like Kha'Zix items, for example, and you want to actually run Kha'Zix over the Irelia or the Lucian or the Senna or whatever is meta that week. The best players are going to make the most use of this comp, so the skill cap is much higher than normal. If you want to just climb and do the brainless stuff, do like reroll Warwick or reroll Talon, or do some of the S tier comps that I have listed out, which are Hextech and Arcanists right now. But yeah, pretty much you just want to do standard leveling, have your fundamentals in check, know when to roll at the right times, make sure you're not too weak at specific points in the game, and pretty much just go from there. Onto the next build, we have Innovators. So finally, Innovators got nerfed. They got nerfed a ton though. I don't know if it was too much. They're in the B tier right now. Maybe they're not that bad, but I just haven't seen that many people playing them. I haven't been seeing the best results from them. They are definitely not S tier like they were last patch. And yeah, it's tough to say. It turns out if you nerf 2 of their key augments and like they removed the Innovator soul as well, it's going to be much more difficult to play the comp. The good news is that the comp was so good before that it's still playable. I still list it out in the B tier. Maybe it's even B plus tier, because the reason why it's strong is because the carry is always flexible. You could use all sorts of different carries similar to the Socialite build. You could use like 10 different things to carry with. Same exact story for Innovators, and also because fights are lasting slightly longer, I feel, Morello is going to be a little better in the comp right now. But for this build, you just want to do standard leveling because you're going for 4 or 5 cost carries as per usual. Next comp up, we have Syndicate Ahri. Syndicate Ahri is very similar to the Arcanist build, and Ahri can use all sorts of different items. I believe I list them all out here. Tons of different options you can use. What you could either do like the damage version, which I have listed out here, or the sustained version with Hextech Gunblade. Both versions are good. It really just depends on what you're hitting in that game. But what you want to focus on is having a main tank in Morgana. Sometimes you could 3-star Morgana if you reroll for her at level 8. So sometimes when you're at level 8, you're at like 50 gold. You're debating whether to go level 9 or get a 3-star Morgana. If you have a bunch of copies of Morgana, let's say 5 or more, you could go ahead and reroll and hit Morgana 3 because that's going to be a really strong tank for you in the late game. And I like it more than just adding in a random unit at level 9. For Silco, I like buffing the tanks in Braum or Morgana. We also have to keep in mind to adapt based on how your game is going. Let's say you get a ton of damage items and you have a Victor 2-star who's itemized up as well. Maybe you want to Silco him up instead. And if you do that, you want to put Silco behind Orianna and Victor because Orianna will get her CC off much faster. If you're facing a sniper build where everyone's in the backline, maybe you want to use your Silco on Zyra so that she stuns the entire backline of the enemy team. It all depends on who you're playing against, so always make sure to keep your Silco a little bit adaptive if you have time to scout during the course of the game. Next up, we have the Twitch Innovator Reroll. So the Twitch build, it really just depends. You just need a lot of Twitches, so you want at least 5 by stage 3-1, which is pretty hard to get. I don't see it happening that often, but if you have decent items for it and at least like 4 or 5 Twitches by that point in the game, you could go for this build. I prefer having a little more and also having some augments to go with it. So if you have like calculated loss, that gives you a ton of gold to go for this build. Maybe you have some of the attack speed or attack damage augments in Knife's Edge or Backfoot. Those are going to be the key ones for this build right here. Next up, we have Syndicate Ashe Reroll. So again, similar to the Talon Reroll build, it's played in a very similar way. However, the main difference is this comp is much weaker than the Talon build, so in a vacuum, like I would prefer to go Talon over Ashe, but sometimes you hit a lot of Ashes, you don't hit a lot of Talons, and then you go for this build instead. And in this build, I like having the 5 Syndicates. I like Rageblade, i.e. Last Whisper on Ashe because it gives her attack speed and probably the best damage combination items in the game for attack damage users, and then have your main tank be Morgana. So sometimes what you can do, you could 3-star Ashe, level up, then 3-star Morgana. If not, let's say you only have Morgana 2-star, maybe you could put the tank items on Braum and have him be your main tank instead. But essentially, you reroll for Ashe on level 6 because she's a 2-cost unit. That's the best time to reroll for 2-cost units, and then level up to 7 later on. Now onto the next build, we have Mutant Malzahar. I'm not really too sure how to feel about mutants right now. The Synaptic version, which was the best one before, got nerfed because Malzahar's mana costs a lot more now. So I like Malzahar in the Arcanist builds a lot more than the mutant builds right now. So I'm going to put the mutants on the back burner because everyone's going to be stealing your Malzahars. We have 2 comps in the A and S tier, which both use Malzahar. So he's just off the table right now. So I don't really recommend playing mutants right now, but they're still playable. You could still do some goofy stuff with the mutant emblems. You could put them on like weird combinations on different units. So that is where they're going to shine the most. So if you don't have those, I don't recommend playing this comp. Next up, we have Corki Reroll. So you only really want to play Corki Reroll if you have So Small or Thieving Rascals. Those are going to be the best augments for this build. I really wouldn't consider playing this without one of those 2 things. Next up, we have Reroll Brand. I've seen some Reroll Syndra's work, but Reroll Brand is pretty sure in the trash can right now. There's some things you could do with lifelong learning if you get a Syndra really early that you could do a carry Syndra build with, but it's really rare to get that, so that's why I list them out in the C tier. Now onto the items. Right now I like tier starts a lot because you could go both the Renata builds and any of the Arcanist builds right now. So that's why I have the AP items listed up really high. After that, if you want to go for the Sivir builds in Hextech or Striker, obviously bows and swords are going to be really good. Oh, another thing with tier, you could still go Sivir because you could build static shivs with this item. That's a quick summary on what items I like in the early game. Again, just to summarize at the top, we have Arcanists and Hextechs, by far the 2 most dominating comps right now. In the A tier, Warwick Reroll is a great candidate if you like reroll. Talon Assassins is the best reroll comp to climb with because I feel like they punish a lot of players who aren't paying attention. Twinshot Arcanist, they're the comp of the week right now. And yeah, it's just a goofy comp, Lucian carry with Arcanist. And you could also flex between 2, 3, and 4 twin shots depending on what you're getting that game. Strikers, it's just a clone of the Hextech build. Renata Bruisers, just a classic of the set so far. Debonair Draven, play with caution. Snipers, play with caution. And then B tier, like, yeah, nerfed. Okay, I'd rather run the Arcanist version. Twitch Reroll, only if you get great starts with it. Ashe Reroll, same story. And the Mutant Malzahar kind of put on the back burner for now. But that is pretty much the best summary I can give for the meta snapshot this week. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I also hope you guys enjoyed the video yesterday. Comment NAR down below if you watch both videos, and I will see you guys later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.